What's up, everybody? Today we're talking about if you're from the United States, which country should you try and go pro in? Ready? It's Thinking Thursday. Let's get it. So, you're in the United States, you grew up here, and you're like, hey, I want to play professional, and I want to play professional abroad. And you're not sure where to go or where to start. First of all, I should say that I have played personally in Mexico, Brazil, Canada, England, Sweden, and Finland, and Israel. I forgot to say Israel. That I've either had a moment in terms of signing for a team, or I've gone on trial with. So one of the things that I've learned throughout all of this is that as I go to each team, I meet players from all these different countries. I've played with players from Madagascar, from Germany, from Italy, from Spain, from Brazil, from Argentina, from Uruguay. All these different countries all have something to say about what's it like to play in their home country versus here in the United States or versus another place in Europe where I met them. And I want to share all this knowledge with you guys, particularly if you're from the United States, because this will help you figure out which countries you might have the best chance of earning that pro contract. So, first thing to know is if you happen to have an Israeli passport, if you're Jewish, then you can go to Israel and act as a non-international player. So when I went to Israel, that was one of the telling factors. Is I was told, hey, if you go and apply for your Israeli passport, you won't count as a foreigner, which means they don't have to pay you quite as much money, and there's more spots for, of course, native Israelis. Now, there's a slight caveat there. If you decide to get your Israeli passport, technically speaking, you can get drafted at any time, no matter what. Now, there are certain rules. If you don't speak Hebrew, or if you didn't grow up there, or if you're at a certain age, they won't draft you. But from the knowledge that I learned, at any point, if there's a really, really serious war and you have an Israeli passport, they can draft you. And that inevitably led me to not going through with my Israeli passport in order to save my mother some stress. Also, at the time, the club I was with were going to sign me as an international anyways because it was going to be easier and faster. And as that was happening, the deadline ended and frankly, it all went crashing down. And my brief time in Israel for me was, wow, I would love to come back here again, but I am a bit hesitant, truth be told, about getting the Israeli passport because of that possibility. Now, I have many teammates and friends who have played in Israel, are Americans, use their Israeli passport, and will probably never ever get drafted. It's not something I've even taken out of the table for me, but first of all, if you're Jewish, that is a helpful option. Next on the list is, I would say, Scandinavia. So Scandinavia, first of all, it's an English-speaking country, so that's quite convenient for us. I've played in countries where they don't speak the language, like when I was living in Israel, although a lot of them speak English, not all of them do, and training was difficult. Even when I was in Sweden, there are some coaches that don't speak English very well, and that makes a big difference. In fact, I actually ended up learning Swedish. Jag kan prata lite svenska, just a little bit, but it really helped me, as a matter of fact. Back to Scandinavia. The reason Scandinavia is a potentially really good opportunity is because if you are a foreigner and you want to play in Sweden, they will give you a work permit, and while you do cost more money, it's not incomprehensible. Roughly, it's about $1,500 a month guaranteed that they have to pay you in order to sign in Sweden and earn a work permit. So if they're willing to pay you above $1,300 to $1,500 in US dollars, that means you can get a work permit there. Now, a few years ago, a lot of players would go to Sweden or Norway or Iceland or Finland and play in the lower leagues on a tourist visa, get paid under the table or not get paid at all, perhaps destroy the lower leagues, and then try and get signed by a team in the upper divisions. Other players I know reached out via Facebook. Shout out to Mike Hartman. That's how he did it, and now he's got a career there. And it's possible to go that route, start at the bottom and work your way up. However, in the most recent times, in about the last year, Sweden have understood, particularly Sweden, that players from all sorts of countries, but particularly the United States, will go there on a tourist visa, try out for these pro teams, get paid under the table, and it's technically illegal. So now they've cut back and they've become really strict on any shenanigans. So that's a lot more difficult. However, if you want to go pro, one of the things I would recommend is you go to something called soccerway.com. And on soccerway.com, you have every single email and phone number of every single team in the entire world. Now, most of those phone numbers don't work. Most of those emails don't work, but you don't have an option. You kind of have to do that. Now, what that website, soccerway.com, does tell you is the website of all these teams. And if you go on the website and you look up if you go to the contact list, there's always some phone number. There's always some email. And I can tell you, I worked with the people who would receive those documents and those emails, and they all want to find the next superstar. So if you email them with a good video and a good content and maybe a connection, hey, I have a friend who used to play for your club, or I have a coach who used to play in Sweden, and maybe you write in Swedish at the very end of the email, the people who receive those emails are usually secretaries or lifetime fans of the club. They would love to be like, oh my gosh, I found Joe, and Joe's now going to come on trial, and it's going to be because of me that they found him. So it's worth sending those emails. I have another friend, Tyler Savitsky. He sent over 300 emails to teams, and he ended up signing with a team in Denmark, and it was a fantastic experience, and he went pro, and after that earned himself a contract in the USL. So it's worth sending those emails, but it's a numbers game. You have to send literally hundreds of emails with a good video, and hopefully you have some sort of reference. If you send your video to me and I think you're a really, really good soccer player and I like you as a person, and maybe I get to see you play live and or train with me, I might be able to connect you to some agents or even to some teams, but I would have to really look at you very closely. But if it's something you're interested in, I always like to help players who have the right personality and really want to go to the next level. So there's that piece. So you've got Scandinavia. Basically, every other place, I've had teammates who have a friend now, Eric Friedlander, who's a great buddy of mine and has a fantastic following, if you don't already follow him, who's in Lithuania right now. I know players that have played in the lower divisions in Germany, Italy, Spain. The difficulties with these is getting that work permit is really difficult. For those, the cost to purchase a foreigner, unlike in Sweden, is much, much higher. In Sweden, they only have 3 spots available for foreigners. In places like Germany, Spain, and Italy, it could be 1, 2, 3, up to 5. But like I said, it can be a lot more expensive for them. The reason it's so difficult is because the country itself is saying, would I rather give a job to a foreigner or to one of our own people? Now, if you can prove to the country of Spain or the country of Italy that if you go there, you can make the country money, then they'll likely sign you. So a lot of players, as you might notice, from the U.S., take Sam Vines, for example. He's played a ton of games for the U.S. national team, and he just signed in Belgium. He had to play a certain number of games for the national team in order to be put on a certain list, you could call it, that would allow a country like Belgium to say, hey, we can get you a work visa because you've played for your respective national team. And the way I learned this was when I was playing at Fulham, I was 14 and Clint Dempsey was playing there. And of course, he was my idol, and I was playing with the youth academy. And he actually drove me home one day after training. And of course, I explained to him, I'm American, I'm here on trial, I want to be like you. And I said to him, hey, how did you get your work permit? Because Fulham had already told me that unless I played for the national team before I was 18, they weren't going to be able to sign me. And so, of course, I was trying to figure out how to get the national team to notice me. And I thought being at Fulham would help that, but the national team never really came knocking on my door. So I asked Clint Dempsey, how is it that you did it? And he explained that it was a really difficult process for him as well. You have to sometimes go to something called tribunal, where they take a vote to basically decide whether you're going to help the country make more money than somebody who's of their own, who's from that country. And after a long time, they did eventually, of course, sort out his contract. So yes, if you're good enough, then they will try and sign you. But it's really difficult. Now, one of the frustrating things is here in the United States, this is where you should be able to go pro easier, right? Because we would limit the amount of foreigners that can play on teams here. But if you look at most MLS teams and certainly USL teams, they can have up to 7 to 11 sometimes foreigners. And that's just the deal that we have here in the United States, which makes it very difficult for us Americans, which is a bummer and a shame in my opinion. However, this is a competitive world. It's about making money, and the best players, of course, want to get signed. Here in the United States, you also have something called a green card. So if you're a foreigner, you can be technically a non-foreigner because you have a green card. So you don't count as taking a foreign spot if you have that green card. So sometimes you'll see a team with maybe all starters who are not from the United States, but they have green cards. So they don't really count as international players. So that is the gist in terms of how do you play abroad. Now, if you don't know where to start, you really want to go abroad, and you're like, I want to play pro. Here are a couple companies that I think are really helpful. AX Soccer Tours, Soccer Visa, and PSC. They take players to places in Asia, places in Cyprus and in Greece and in a country called Malta, which is in the Mediterranean, and it's beautiful, and you could go play First Division maybe, which plays in Europa League, but you have to have a connection of some kind. And of course, it's a very different lifestyle than, say, living here, but it could be a wonderful experience for you. And you may look at these companies that I mentioned and say, well, they just want my money. Well, that's the deal. That's how you're going to get your chance. So if you don't want to spend the money, it's going to be very difficult. That's how it works at the moment. If we all grew up in England where there was an academy and you could play for free and grow up the ranks, then it would work better. But here, that's not the case, which actually is a benefit only in that if you're in a different country, money will not give you an opportunity. Here, money can give you that chance. So work hard, do the extra jobs, whatever it is you have to do, and I would say go for it. If it doesn't work out, you can go back to whatever life you had to beforehand. But that it takes that investment. That's just the reality of the game. And it's, in a way, a blessing because we have the opportunity to try out for these scouting companies who want to take you abroad. So, with that said, I hope that was very helpful in regards to this Thinking Thursday and which countries you could possibly play in. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll talk soon.